All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Senate Committee on Finance and the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means as Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. I'm Senator Angie Taylor, and I have the honor of leading our path on this morning. So we'll start with our roll call, Madam Secretary. Mr. Secretary.
Assemblymember Anderson.
Present.
Assemblymember Brown May.
Here.
Assemblymember Dickman. Assemblymember Hibbets. Assemblymember Mosca.
Here.
Senator Wen.
Here.
Senator Titus. Assemblymember Watts. Chair Taylor.
And I am present. Thank you very much. We have several budgets to close from the Department of Corrections, and we will certainly just go in order. We will have a public comment at the end of our meeting for anyone who's here in Carson City, or if anyone shows up there in Las Vegas, and who knows, there may even be somebody on the phone line this morning. So if anyone would like to make public comment and phone in for that, that number is 888-475-4499. The meeting ID is 8533-8727-900, and that number is also on the agenda. We will be doing the closings on today, mostly led by staff. Ms. Morris will walk us through it, but should you end up coming forward, make sure you turn the microphone on and say your name clearly for the record. Make sure you spell your last name, and then every time you speak, make sure you say your name as well. And then finally, as you can see, committee members have our electronic devices in front of us, our laptops and so on. Please don't take that as a sign of disrespect or inattention. We have notes and so on here that we often refer to. So, that being said, we can get started with the Department of Corrections. We'll start with the department overview. Ms. Morris, when you are ready. After we pass things out. Yeah. So after Ms. Crockett passes things out. Going to get started? Oh, you can start right away. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nancy Morris, Fiscal Analysis Division. Today, the subcommittee will be considering a total of 28 budget accounts for the Department of Corrections, plus a department overview. 12 of the budget accounts have been heard previously, and 16 are what would be considered staff closed, which the subcommittee has not heard previously. The first budget account discussion begins on page 3, which is department-wide overview. The purpose of this budget account is to make decisions about decision units that have impacts across multiple budget accounts within the Department of Corrections, so that decisions are made one time and not separately for each budget. So there are 4 major closing issues in this budget account. The first of which begins on page 3, the offender populations and facility capacity. The governor recommends an increase in general fund appropriations of $1.1 million, the utilization of $276,215 in reserves, and reductions of $455,000 in other funds in fiscal 26, and an increase in general fund appropriations of $1.6 million, the utilization of $168,667 in reserves, and reductions of $169,302 in other funds in fiscal 27 to fund increased offender-driven costs related to an increase in projected offender populations. Historically, the James F. Austin and Associates Company has provided projections, which the Department of for offenders, which the Department of Corrections then flows through to facility budgets, as shown in the table on the top of page 5. The governor's recommended budget included 10,739 average offenders in fiscal 2026 and 10,970 average offenders in fiscal year 2027. During the budget hearing on February 26, 2025, the governor's finance office indicated it was working on a short-term contract with the previous vendor, James F. Austin and Associates, to provide updated offender projections, which on April 4th, 2025, the NDOC provided the updated projections based on the March numbers from JFA to total 10,794 average offenders in fiscal year 2026 and 11,031 average offenders in fiscal year 2027. which are shown in the table in the top of page 7 compared to the governor's recommended offender counts by facility, along with a comparison to the actual average for fiscal year 2024. The new numbers represent an increase of 55 offenders in fiscal year 26 and 61 offenders in fiscal year 27 compared to the governor's recommended offender counts. The total expenses based on the updated offender projections for the M200 decision unit results in $1.5 million, which of that $1.4 million is a general fund increase in fiscal 26, and $2.2 million, $1.9 million of which is a general fund increase in fiscal year 2027 in the M200 decision units across the department, aside from the medical expenditures budget. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 7. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the average annual offender population caseloads as recommended by the governor and adjusted to reflect the April 2025 forecasts of 10,794 offenders in fiscal year 2026 and 11,031 offenders in fiscal year 2027, including net funding of $1.5 million in fiscal year 2026 and $2.2 million in fiscal year 2027?
Thank you so much, Ms. Morris. Is there any discussion from the committee, questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Please continue.
The second major closing item is on page 7, which is new positions for the grievance process. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $453,303 in fiscal year 26 and $609,813 in fiscal 27 to add a total of 6 new positions consisting of 1 program officer and 1 correctional casework specialist in each at Northern Nevada Correctional Center, Southern Desert Correctional Center, and Ely State Prison to address the grievance process caseloads. According to the Department of Corrections, 13,911 grievances were processed department-wide in fiscal year 23, 12,305 were processed in fiscal year 2024. The agency indicates the 6 new recommended positions would help manage the process and ensure that timelines and workloads are appropriately managed with improved efficiency, resulting in a more consistent process. During the February 26, 2025 budget hearing, the agency indicated there were over 800 pending civil litigation cases against the department and testified that approximately 90% of grievances do not get exhausted through the process and become lawsuits because there's not sufficient staff to follow up and monitor grievances. The decision for the subcommittee on page 8. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for 6 new positions, 2 each at Northern Nevada Correctional Center, Southern Desert Correctional Center, and Ely State Prison, and associated costs to address grievances funded by general fund appropriations of $453,303 in fiscal year 26 and $609,813 in fiscal year 2027.
Thank you so much, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
Second.
Thank you so much. There's a chair. There's a there's a motion from Chair Watts. He's also in a chair. And then there's a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The third major issue is utilities inflation, which was not included in the governor's recommended budget. On March 19th, 2025, the governor's finance office submitted 14 budget amendments for general fund appropriations totaling $2.9 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium for utilities expenses in various Department of Corrections budget accounts. The governor's finance office indicates the decision units to increase utility expenses were inadvertently omitted from the governor's recommended budget. In fiscal year 2024, the department received allocations from the Interim Finance Committee Contingency Fund totaling $3.1 million for 11 NDOC budgets to address utilities shortfalls in fiscal year 2024. The table on page 9 shows the FY24 actual utilities expenses compared to the governor's recommendations for the 2025-27 biennium, along with the 14 submitted budget amendments that total up to the $2.9 million. The decision for the subcommittee on page 10. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $2.9 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium for inflationary utilities expenses as detailed in the previous table for the 14 budget amendments?
Thank you so much, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
Thank you, Chair Watts. We have a motion, and then we have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries, and let the record show it is unanimous. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The fourth major closing issue is an additional staffing request. At the April 3rd, 2025 Interim Finance Committee meeting, there was discussion regarding the Department of Corrections overtime expenses, which totaled approximately $52 million in additional funds in fiscal year 2025. The primary factor for the overtime expenses was an insufficient number of authorized positions. The IFC requested the agency to provide a list of resources that, if approved, would reduce the agency's overtime expenses. The staffing levels in the Department of Corrections are generally based on a post-centric staffing model, which uses charts that identify positions and posts at various institutions based on generally an 8-hour, 3-shift per day system, which also include a shift relief factor to determine how many positions it takes to fill a single protective service post for a single shift, considering vacation, sick time, training days, and other types of leaves. The 81st 2021 legislature approved $289,000 for a staffing study in fiscal year 2022, and the agency was unable to explain due to staff turnover why no study had taken place. General funds were again provided by the 2023 legislature of $395,000 for a staffing study, which is currently underway, and the agency indicates results will be available in July of 2025. The agency indicated as a result of utilizing inaccurate post charts that 2 housing units, Housing Unit 12 at Ely State Prison and Housing Unit 8 at Lovelock Correctional Center, were not included in the agency's post charts, and since no staff was budgeted for the housing units, overtime was used to provide staff in order to house offenders in these units. The agency clarified that while its vacancy rate had decreased significantly, part of that decrease was due to hiring staff as soon as a recruit passed initial tests and background checks contingent upon passing the academy and other tests. The budgets for the facilities are based on correctional officer positions being filled by staff able to perform all the duties, and filling the positions with trainees who are not yet able to fully perform the duties of the positions also requires additional staff trained and able to perform the duties to be assigned to the same post, leading to overtime pay. For the Central Transportation Unit, the agency indicated that only 20 officers were currently budgeted for the Central Transportation Unit, and in the last 6 months, an average of 66.7 officers were needed each day for hospital trips, hospital guarding, and medical appointments, which resulted in overtime being used to provide an average of 46.7 officers each day. The agency indicated its training academy was only budgeted for 7 positions, which was not sufficient for the amount of training required both pre-service and in-service. And in 2024, the agency indicated 243 officers were borrowed from posts in facilities in order to have sufficient staff to conduct training. During the meeting, the agency indicated that it took steps to reduce overtime, including a minimum staffing plan, which provides internal guidance for reducing or eliminating posts while still providing security, implementing lockdowns, reducing programming, and reducing visitation. Subsequent to the April 3rd, 2025 IFC meeting, the agency provided a prioritized list of 4 requests for additional staff, which total 90 new positions at a cost of $12 million in fiscal '26 and $13.5 million in fiscal '27, for a total of $25.5 million over the '25-27 biennium, as shown in the table at the top of page 12. The agency indicates, if approved, the recruitments for positions would begin in October 25, and once hired, new recruits would attend the 10-week agency academy before fulfilling posts in the facility. Therefore, if the new positions are approved, reductions in overtime as a result of the additional positions would not be realized for any of the 4 requests until March 2026. Beginning on page 12 and carrying on to page 13 are summaries of the requests. The first one is 47 positions for the Central Transportation Unit. The second request in priority order is 23 positions for the Training Academy. The third would be for 10 positions for Lovelock Correctional Center Housing Unit 8. Fiscal staff would note an incorrect start date for the positions was used in calculating the cost for this particular request, which ended up overstating the cost by $353,470 in fiscal year '26 and for the biennium. So if the subcommittee wishes to recommend approval of this request, fiscal staff would recommend a technical adjustment to correct the start dates of the positions. And the fourth request is 10 positions for Ely State Prison Housing Unit 12. According to this state's human resources data warehouse system, through April 13th, 2025, the agency has incurred $10 million in overtime expenses for muster pay in fiscal '25, which, per the collective bargaining agreement, each employee who's a member of that group receives 45 minutes of overtime for each day worked to compensate employees for an employee's time after entering his or her work area. It does not appear that any of the 4 requests for additional staff would decrease the overtime expense related to muster pay, since each employee that works a shift would be entitled to muster pay per the current collective bargaining agreement. Considering the magnitude of overtime costs, the subcommittee may wish to issue a letter of intent to the Department of Corrections, instructing the department to provide quarterly reports on the actual overtime expenses, including the reason codes for the overtime, actions taken by the NDOC to reduce overtime, and the agency's plans to fund the overtime, with the first report due by October 31st, 2025. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 13.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Morris. There's a little more as we go deeper into this decision unit. We first begin, I know Senator Nguyen has a question or comment.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate that we ultimately will have this staffing study. Unfortunately, I think it will come too late for us to make any significant decisions based on whatever is in that. But I look forward to seeing what that means for this agency moving forward and trying to get our numbers correct. And I do want to give a special thanks to our staff and having countless meetings with the chairs as well as the chairs of Ways and Finance to find if we can come up with solutions that might alleviate which has become the magnitude of these overtime costs that NDOC has incurred over the past 2 years. And so I have had the opportunity to review the recommendation on page 13, and I think that this gives us a start. We heard that there was lots of issues with overtime when it came to medical transportations and court transportations, and then we also heard that there was NDOC has their own post-academy training that is also taking away people and contributing to extreme overtime issues as well. So I think the recommendations included in the upcoming motion, I think, will go a long way to reduce some of those unexpected overtime issues, but also give flexibility to fully staff this post-training so we don't have some of those issues with transportation. So thank you, and thank you to staff and the chairs for that time.
Thank you so much, Senator Nguyen. I will entertain the motion and we'll go to Chair Watts.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just say a couple of words as well, kind of echoing Senator Nguyen. I appreciate everything that the department has worked on with our fiscal staff following the IFC to figure out how to address this issue. This is a significant request. We know the Economic Forum is meeting today, and the range of outcomes are all negative from the numbers that were used to kind of build the governor's recommended budget. At the same time, we see the magnitude of the overtime expenses and recognize that we are going to have to spend some money in order to save some money when it comes to those overtime expenses. And additionally, again, we know that we're not going to have that staffing study available to us to make decisions for this upcoming biennium. I appreciate the efforts that went into figuring out some ways that we can start to get ahead of this, knowing that we'll probably be revisiting some of the results from that staffing study and making additional adjustments. I think this shows that we need additional staff in order to handle the overtime issues and just make sure that we have safe and sustainable staffing, both for the staff as well as for inmates within the system. So all of that being said, based on all of this discussion, I would recommend approval of the following. General fund appropriations of $13.6 million over the 2025-27 biennium to support 47 new positions for the Central Transportation Unit. And general fund appropriations, inclusive of the noted technical adjustment to correct position start dates, of $2.5 million over the 2025-27 biennium to support 10 new positions for Lovelock Correctional Center Housing Unit 8, and general fund appropriations of $2.5 million over the 2025-27 biennium to support 10 new positions for Ely State Prison Housing Unit 12. In addition, I recommend approval of the following. The creation of a new budget account for the NDOC Training Academy, which would include the following. 23 new positions for Training Academy staff funded with general fund appropriations of $6.5 million over the 2025-27 biennium. 90 new correctional officer trainee positions. These position control numbers would be placeholder seats filled with trainees while at the academy, and the trainees would then transition to position control numbers in facility and institution budgets after completion of their training academy. The trainee positions would be funded with general fund appropriations of approximately $18.8 million over the 2025-27 biennium. In addition, this budget account would include the transfer of positions, expenses, and funding related to the training academy, which are currently budgeted in existing NDOC budget accounts, including training staff in the director's office budget account. This new training academy budget would be excluded from the provisions of the Appropriations Act, which allow the NDOC to transfer funds amongst NDOC budget accounts. Also, I recommend issuing a letter of intent to the NDOC to report to the Interim Finance Committee on a quarterly basis regarding its overtime expenditures. These reports should include a detailed breakdown of overtime costs, accurate and specific reason codes identifying the causes of overtime, actions the department has taken to reduce overtime, the department's plans to manage and fund future overtime within the confines of its existing budgets, and copies of quarterly overtime reports the department submits to the Board of Examiners, and finally, authorize fiscal staff to make technical adjustments as needed.
Thank you so much, Chair Watts. I know that was a lot, but that is the motion before us. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts, and there is a second from Senator Nguyen. Open for discussion, committee? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. And what I will add to the conversation is I really hope the department sees an attempt in such very difficult budget situations to really recognize the difficult situation you're in and to provide a creative solution to addressing some of those needs and looking forward to a better outcome next biennium. Okay. Please go ahead, Ms. Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is one other closing item in this department-wide overview, which is on page 14, which is Appropriations Act language. The governor recommends language in the 2025 Appropriations Act, providing that the sums appropriated to the department may be transferred amongst the various budget accounts in the department in the same manner and within the same limits as allowed for revision of work programs, except for deferred and extraordinary maintenance, and as previously discussed in the motion just approved, the new training academy budget would be excluded from this language to allow the transfers. So the decision on page 14, fiscal staff recommends the other closing item be closed as recommended by the governor with the adjustment for the new budget academy and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Is there any discussion or questions for staff? If not, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
Thank you so much, Chair Watts. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. We'll go on to the next budget, Ms. Morris. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nancy Morris, Fiscal Analysis Division. Now we move on to the specific budget accounts, beginning on page 19 with the prison medical care budget account. There are two major closing issues in this budget account. The first of which is the medical expense projections, which includes the M200 decision unit, which was not included in the department-wide discussion. Through decision units M101, M200, and E270, the governor recommends general fund appropriations totaling $4 million in fiscal '26 and $5.7 million in fiscal '27 to support changes in offender-driven medical expenses due to estimated medical inflation and changes in the offender population. For the M101 decision unit, the governor recommends general fund appropriation increases of $2.3 million in fiscal '26 and $3.4 million in fiscal '27 to address medical inflation associated with outside medical expenses, prescription drugs, dental supplies, and medical supplies over the biennium. The funding for inflationary adjustments is understated in the governor's recommended budget since the inflationary adjustments were not applied to the total projected population, which would result in an increase of $379,483 compared to the governor's recommended budget of $5.7 million. The offender population M200 decision unit, the governor recommended general fund appropriations of $1.5 million in fiscal year '26 and $2.1 million in fiscal year 2027 to fund increases in medical expenses due to changes in offender population. And in female health exams, which is decision unit E270, the governor recommended general fund appropriations of $145,121 in fiscal year '26 and $149,559 in fiscal year '27 for increases in healthcare screenings for female offenders. However, the agency indicates it has reviewed updated expenses and the recommended $294,680 over the biennium in this decision unit is no longer needed. Updates provided since the budget hearing. The medical inflation M101 decision unit, the agency indicated that increase was primarily due to the increase in the use of outside medical providers along with increases in costs for each service incurred. On March 22nd, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A256283706 to correct the population used in the Governor's recommendation for Decision Unit M101. However, as discussed in the department overview, updated offender population projections from the NDOC were received on April 4th, 2025. Therefore, fiscal staff recommends not approving Budget Amendment A256283706 and instead adjusting the offender population in Decision Unit M101 to align with the updated offender projections of 10,794 in fiscal year 2026 and 11,031 in fiscal year 2027, which would result in an increase of $135,431 in fiscal year 26 and $276,971 in fiscal year 27 compared to the Governor's recommended budget. For the offender population Decision Unit M200, with the updated offender projections, Decision Unit M200 would increase by $151,574 in fiscal year 26 and $168,111 in fiscal year 27. For the female health exams in Decision Unit E270, during the budget hearing, the agency clarified that it would still provide the exams. However, the extra funding was no longer needed because the agency determined it could absorb the cost in its budget. On April 1st, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A258063706 to eliminate Decision Unit E270 and the general fund appropriations of $294,680 over the 25-27 biennium. The decisions for the subcommittee on page 22. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the following? Decision Unit M101, the Governor's recommendation as adjusted for updated population forecasts of general fund appropriations of $2.5 million in fiscal year 26 and $3.7 million in fiscal year 27, and not approve Budget Amendment A256283706. And Decision Unit M200, the Governor's recommendation as adjusted for the updated population forecasts of general fund appropriations of $1.6 million in fiscal year 26 and $2.3 million in fiscal year 2027. And Decision Unit E270, Budget Amendment A258063706, to eliminate the Governor's recommendation for general fund appropriations of $294,680 over the 25-27 biennium for female exams.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
Second.
Thank you so much. We have a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Any opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Thank you. Major closing issue number 2 begins on page 23, which is general fund appropriations to replace recommended elimination of transfers from the inmate welfare account. The Governor recommends general fund appropriations of $2.3 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium to replace transfers from the inmate welfare account, budget account for medical copays. However, the funding recommendation is to support reimbursable medical expenses. The agency indicates the transfers are not medical copayment revenue as indicated in the executive budget, but are instead transfers for medical expense reimbursements. This transfer has historically occurred as transfers from the offender store fund budget account to the inmate welfare account to the prison medical care budget account. On January 29th, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A251923706 to continue the transfers from the inmate welfare account budget account to the prison medical care budget account and eliminate the general fund appropriations included in the executive budget. 2 related budget amendments were also submitted to restore the transfers from the inmate welfare account and the offender store fund budget accounts. During the budget hearing on March 13th, 2025, the agency indicated the Governor's recommendation to eliminate the transfer was to demonstrate that copays are no longer assessed. However, as indicated, the transfers are not copays but are medical expense reimbursements as allowed per NRS 209-246-1B. The agency indicated the amendment was to correct an error in the governor's recommended budget. The decision for the subcommittees on page 24. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $2.3 million each year of the 25-27 biennium to eliminate revenue transfers from the inmate welfare account as originally recommended by the governor? Or does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of budget amendment A251923706 to continue transfers from the inmate welfare account, budget account of $2.3 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium, and eliminate the governor's recommendation for general fund appropriations of $2.3 million each year? Fiscal staff recommends corresponding actions in the inmate welfare account and offender store fund budget accounts regarding the decision units and submitted budget amendments to restore the transfers.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval of Budget Amendment A251923706 to continue transfers from the inmate welfare account, budget account of $2.3 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, and eliminate the governor's recommendation for general fund appropriations of $2.3 million each year.
Thank you so much. There's a motion from Chair Watts. Is there a second? Second from Senator Nguyen. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries, and let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris, next budget account.
There are two other closing items on page 24 for this budget account. One regarding a budget amendment that was submitted to restore a position in the base budget, and the other one with a technical adjustment to remove duplicated expenses. Fiscal staff recommends other closing item 1 be closed as recommended in budget amendment A258063706, and other closing item 2 be closed with the noted technical adjustment to remove duplicate expenses, and requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. We can't forget the other items. Any discussion for staff? Seeing none, I'll entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
There's a motion and a second to recommend approval as read by staff. Any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Now we can go on to the next budget account.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Budget account 3708, the Offender Store Fund, which begins on page 27 of the closing packet, has two major closing issues. The first one is transfers to prison industries, the prison ranch, and the inmate welfare account. The governor recommends transfers of retained earnings totaling $600,000 in fiscal year 26 to the prison industry, which would be $250,000, and then $350,000 to the prison ranch budget account to address solvency concerns in these budgets. The use of revenue in the Offender Store Fund budget account is restricted by NRS 209.2213, which indicates the funds are to be used for welfare and benefit of all offenders or for any other purpose authorized by the legislature. The main source of revenue in this budget account is proceeds from sales at general merchandise stores or commissaries located in correctional facilities, which is projected in the base budget at $14.9 million each year in the 25-27 biennium. The agency is in the process of implementing a new tablet program for all offenders and anticipates receiving revenue from the offenders' use of the tablets. However, the agency is unable to provide projections for the revenue source at this time. As in the prison medical budget account, a budget amendment A252013708 to reestablish the transfer authority from this budget account to the inmate welfare budget account was submitted by the governor's finance office. During the budget hearing on March 13th, 2025, the agency indicated that the implementation of the new tablet program had been delayed and would potentially be functioning in June of 2025. And the agency confirmed that it anticipated it would receive revenue from the program, but due to the unknowns involving the projections, the funding was not included in the budget. The decision for the subcommittee on page 29 Decision Unit E306, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer a total of $600,000 of retained earnings to the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts in fiscal year 2026? Fiscal staff recommends the decision units in the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts be closed consistent with the subcommittee's recommendation in closing this budget account. And based on the subcommittee's decision in the prison medical budget to approve budget amendment to reinstate the transfers, fiscal staff would recommend approving budget amendment A252013708 to increase the transfers of store sales revenue from the offender store fund budget account to the inmate welfare account by $2.3 million in each year of the 2025 to 27 biennium to be consistent with the subcommittee's recommendation in closing the prison medical budget account.
Thank you so much, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, go ahead, Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regardless what the decision is going to be, I am not supportive of the free phone calls in this particular budget item. So however it's made, I'm not going to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Titus. Any further discussion? Yes, Senator Nguyen?
Can I just clarify? I know during the presentations, and I believe that there was a decision, a federal decision or mandate that indicated that we had to provide so many phone calls. Is that correct? Am I have a correct understanding? Nope. I'm getting a shaking ahead that there wasn't any requirement on this. For some reason, I thought there was some sort of requirement to have so many minutes every year.
Chair Watch, you want to respond to that?
Sure, there's a couple things going on here. So my understanding is that the only federal requirements were limitations on charges for phone calls. So I think that's what you might be thinking of. And then to Senator Titus, I believe this particular item, so definitely understand where you're coming from. I think we've got a couple of other ones coming up that tie into that a little bit more. This is really around transfers to the prison industry and prison ranch programs to essentially restore money that was swept to the general fund during the last recession. So this item in particular, I don't think is actually related to anything related to the provision of phone calls.
Thank you, Chair Watts. Further questions or discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain the motion. Chair Watts?
Thank you, and I'll just give a quick statement. Definitely appreciate this being brought forward and understand it. We appreciate that, essentially the department was kind of voluntold to help us get through our last budget downturn. And I know we're going to have a more robust conversation when we get to the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts about some of the solvency issues there. At the same, and so I definitely support restoring this money that was swept out of those accounts. At the same time, I do not believe that it's appropriate to do that on the backs of inmates. So I recommend not approving the governor's recommendation for transfers of $600,000 of retained earnings to the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts in fiscal year 2026, and instead recommend approval of a total of $600,000 of one-time general fund appropriations to the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts in FY 2026, with corresponding changes to the funding source in the decision units in the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts. And I recommend approving budget amendment A25201 3708 to increase transfers of store sales revenue from the offender store fund budget account to the inmate welfare account by $2.3 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, consistent with the subcommittee's recommendation that we just made in closing the prison medical budget account.
Thank you, Chair Watts. Is there a second on the motion? We have a motion from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion? No further discussion. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Okay, let's let the record show opposition. Senator Titus, Assemblyman Hibbets, and Assemblymember Dickman. Okay, Ms. Morris, when you're ready, we'll continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second major closing issue is position transfers and funding source change. The governor recommends retained earnings increases of $2 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium as a result of transferring 20 positions from the Offender Store Fund budget account to the Director's Office budget account. The positions in the Offender Store Fund budget account are funded with sales revenues from the offender commissaries, and the recommended change in the funding source to general fund, the governor recommends changing the funding source of the positions to general fund appropriations in the Director's Office budget account. The table at the bottom of page 29 shows the specific positions included in this decision unit. The agency indicates changing the position funding would relieve pressure on commissary product markups. According to the agency, store markups on personal hygiene products have been eliminated, and the maximum markup allowed on clothing, food, and vending machine purchases is 35%, with a maximum of 10% markup on religious materials. The decision for the subcommittee on page 30. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer 20 positions from the Offender Store Fund budget account to the Director's Office budget account, where the funding source of the positions would change to new general fund appropriations of $2 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium? Fiscal staff recommends the decision units in the Director's Office budget account to transfer in and change the funding of the positions be closed, consistent with the subcommittee's recommendation in this budget account.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions from staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just a quick statement. Really appreciate, and I think many of us wholeheartely support efforts to try and reduce the markups on commissary items. So we appreciate that's been heard and that's a goal that's shared by the department. As well as to increase the resources available for inmate welfare, programming, etc. At the same time, on this particular item, I do not feel that it's appropriate to transfer these positions out because the Offender Store Fund is designed to be its own self-supporting budget account with any additional revenue then supporting those other activities. So I would move to not recommend approval of this item.
There is a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and there's a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 8 other closing items on page 30 of your closing packet. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 8 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Assemblymember Brown-May. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Let's continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget account is the inmate welfare account, which begins on page 33 of the closing packet. There is one major closing issue in this budget account, and it is position transfers and funding source change. The governor recommends retained earnings increases of $1.7 million in each year of the biennium as a result of transferring 16 positions from the inmate welfare account to the correctional programs budget account and to change the funding of the positions. As similar to the previous decision made by the committee, the positions in the inmate welfare account are currently funded with sales revenue from the offender commissaries. The positions included in this decision, in the 3 decision units, are shown on the table on page 33. During the budget hearing on March 13th, 2025, the agency indicated if the recommended position transfers and corresponding funding source change for the positions were approved, the agency would utilize the store sales revenue that currently supports the position costs to meet its planned administrative regulation to require a minimum of 6 months of operating costs and reserves. The decision for the subcommittee on page 34. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer 16 positions from the inmate welfare budget account to the correctional programs budget account and change the funding source of the positions to general fund appropriations of $1.7 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium? Fiscal staff recommends the decision units in the correctional programs budget account to transfer in and change funding for the positions be closed consistent with the subcommittee's recommendation in this budget account.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, and I believe Senator Titus, this is your cue. I do support this, and the one other thing that I forgot to mention is that while there's a lot of uncertainty, we do know that those tablets are going to come online, and those are going to bring some additional revenue as well. But I do support this, and so I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There is a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Assemblymember Brown-May. Discussion on the motion? Senator Titus?
I stand by my prior statements and will also be a no on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Titus. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? No. Okay, let the record show we have opposition from Senator Titus, Assemblymember, Dickman, and Assemblymember Hibbets. Please continue. Right, we will have differences because it doesn't pass on the Senate side. I'll call Rochelle back in. Please continue, Ms. Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There, on page 35 of the closing packet, there are 13 other closing items for this budget account. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 12 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 13, budget amendment A252023763 be closed consistent with the subcommittee's recommendation in closing major closing issue 2 in the prison medical care budget account and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll entertain the motion.
Thank you. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts, the second from Assemblymember Brown-May. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
The next budget account begins on page 37, which is Warm Springs Correctional Center, which is a currently closed facility. The governor recommends the transfer of general fund appropriations of $413,258 in fiscal 26 and $417,352 in fiscal 27 to transfer 3 positions and associated costs to the director's office budget account. The 3 positions recommended to transfer include 1 correctional lieutenant position that was eliminated by the 2023 legislature due to the temporary closure of the facility and therefore does not exist. However, the position was reestablished within the governor's recommended base budget and is included in the decision unit to transfer 3 positions to the director's office budget account. The governor's base budget includes 15 positions in each year. And through enhancement decision units, the governor recommends transferring 13 of those 15 positions to other budget accounts. The 2023 legislature reduced the authorized positions in this budget account from 119 positions to 14 positions in the 2023-25 biennium. and one senior correctional officer position, which is included in the E933 decision unit, is identified under a different position control number than it was included in the legislatively approved budget. On March 28, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A256123716 to remove the non-authorized position from the base budget and Decision Unit E933 to change the position control number of the correctional office to change the position control number of the senior correctional officer position to the position control number that was in the legislatively approved budget. With these changes, general fund appropriations in the base budget would decrease by $159,853 in fiscal year 26 and $164,302 in fiscal year 27. As amended, the transfer of general fund appropriations in Decision Unit E933 would total $253,402 in fiscal 26 and $253,046 in fiscal year 27. The decision for the subcommittee on page 38. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A256123716 to correct the positions in the base budget and Decision Unit E933, resulting in the transfer of two positions and general fund appropriations of $253,402 in fiscal year 26 and $253,046 in fiscal 27 to the Director's Office budget account?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Motion yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for. Let's have a motion. Chair Watts?
You got it, Chair. Aye. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
Thank you. There is a motion now from Chair Watts and a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, now all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries, and we still have ayes. All right, let's keep going. Thank you. Aye, aye.
There are 9 other closing issues for this budget account, including a technical adjustment for the last 2 items. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 7 be closed as recommended by the governor, and other closing item 8 be closed with the noted technical adjustment to eliminate the protective gear expense, and other closing item 9 be closed with the noted technical adjustment to reduce utilities expenses. Fiscal staff requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
There is a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
The next budget account is the Wells Conservation Camp budget account, which begins on page 41. There's one major closing issue, which is the recommended transfer of positions and offender costs and facility closure. The governor recommends the transfer of general fund appropriations of $2 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium to transfer 13 positions, 2 vehicles, and offender-driven costs from the Wells Conservation Camp to other budgets within the department. During the agency's budget hearing before the Legislative Commission's Budget Subcommittee on January 22nd, 2025, the agency indicated that the Wells Conservation Camp was selected as the next location to close due to the amount of infrastructure costs that would be required to continue operating at this location. Through decision units E900, E902, E903, and E907, the governor recommends the transfers of 13 positions from this budget account to other operational facilities. And through decision units E904 and 990, the governor recommends the transfer of offenders and related offender-driven caseload expenses to High Desert State Prison, and the transfer of 2 vehicles to Ely State Prison, which are all shown in the table on page 42. During the budget hearing on February 26, 2025, the agency confirmed its plan to move offenders from Wells Conservation Camp to Carlin Conservation Camp after offenders performing wildland firefighting duties at Carlin Conservation Camp were moved to other facilities. The agency testified the recommended transfer of offender-driven costs from the Wells Conservation Camp to High Desert State Prison, as recommended in Decision Unit E904, was an attempt to correct the funding in the High Desert State Prison budget account to align with the offender population change as a result of the September 2024 transfers. The NDOC, as noted, provided updated offender population projections in April 2025, which correct the projected population at High Desert State Prison, and those populations are again shown on the table of page 43, including population changes as a result of the recommended closure of Wells Conservation Camp. Since the updated population projections correct the High Desert State Prison population and the closure of Wells Conservation Camp, if approved, would result in offender population increases at facilities other than High Desert State Prison, fiscal staff recommends technical adjustments to Decision Unit E904 to transfer offender-driven costs from Wells Conservation Camp to the other facilities as shown in the table, to align the projected population increases as a result of the closure, instead of transferring all offender-driven costs to the High Desert State Prison budget account as recommended by the governor. The decision on page 44, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer general fund appropriations of $2 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium, along with associated costs for positions, vehicles, and offender-driven expenses, with the noted technical adjustment to align Decision Unit E904 with updated offender population projections in the institutions and facilities receiving the transferred offenders, instead of transferring the offender-driven cost to High Desert State Prison, and close the Wells Conservation Camp. Fiscal staff requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions from staff? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
Second.
Thank you so much. There is a motion from Chair Watts and a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget account is the Director's Office, which begins on page 45. There are two major closing issues in this budget account. The first one is a new cloud-based case management tool. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $500,000 each year of the 25-27 biennium for a contract to support a new cloud-based case management tool platform to calculate offender sentences. AB 236 of the 2019 session, amongst other things, required the department to complete risk and needs assessments of offenders to determine programming and placement within the department, and the results of the assessments are used to develop individualized case plans for offenders. In addition, Senate Bill 413 of the 2023 session replaced credit-based sentence calculations with percentage-based calculations for offenders who comply with the results of the needs assessment. In addition, Senate Bill 413 requires the agency to implement the new sentence calculations by July 1, 2025. On January 27th, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A25193710 to remove the general fund appropriations of $500,000 in each year of the 25-27 biennium for the case management tool, and the Governor's Finance Office indicated it would instead request funding the case management tool through legislation for one-time appropriations. Subsequent to the budget hearing on February 26, 2025, the agency indicated that if approved by the 2025 legislature, the case management tool would be implemented in January 2026, which factored in timing to execute a contract, gather requirements, and initiate the project. In addition, the agency indicated that the $500,000 per year for this expense, as included in the governor's recommended budget, is an ongoing expenditure and not a one-time expense. Therefore, it would be more appropriate to include the funding for this expense in the agency's budget instead of through one-time funding as recommended in Budget Amendment A25193710. The decision for the subcommittee on page 46. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $500,000 each year of the 25-27 biennium for the case management tool as originally recommended by the governor? Or does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of Budget Amendment A2519133710 to eliminate general fund appropriations of $500,000 each year of the 25-27 biennium for the cloud-based case management tool? The governor's amended recommendation to fund the software through one-time appropriations would be considered through the bill process.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions from staff? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Thank you, Chair. Seeing as how this is going to be an ongoing expense, I think we need to bake it into the budget. So I would move to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $500,000 each year of the 2025-27 biennium for the case management tool as originally recommended by the governor.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there opposition? The motion carries, and let the record show that it is unanimous of those who are here. Ms. Morris?
The second major closing item in this budget is the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, or SCAP grant. The governor's recommended budget for the 25-27 biennium does not include revenue from the federal SCAP grant. The agency indicates the SCAP grant funding was not included in the governor's recommended budget because a new award had not been received by the NDOC when the budget was built. The Bureau of Justice Assistance administers the SCAP grant, which provides federal payments to states and localities that incur costs for incarcerating undocumented offenders who were convicted of at least one felony or 2 misdemeanors and incarcerated for at least 4 consecutive days during the reporting period for the award. On January 16, 2025, the agency received notification of a new SCAP grant award of $2.1 million. On April 1, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A258273710 to add SCAP grant funds of $1.5 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium with expenditure authority in a special use category. This approach to use a special use category does not follow the previous procedure where upon receipt of SCAP grant funds, an equal amount of general fund has been reverted since the agency's budget was fully funded with general fund appropriations. If the subcommittee wishes to recommend approval to include SCAP grant funds in the agency's budget, the subcommittee may wish to recommend reducing general fund appropriations in this budget account as an offset to the corresponding amount of SCAP grant funds included. The agency indicated that the $1.5 million each year was determined as a conservative amount due to the variability in awards and expectation that more applicants will be competing with the NDOC for future awards. The table on page 48 shows the average of the it shows the 5 most recent awards, and the 3-year average of the 3 most recent is $2.7 million, which is slightly less than the average of the all 5 most recent awards. While the $1.5 million estimate from the NDOC is $1.2 million below the average due to the inconsistency in award amounts, budgeting the SCAP grant at the 3-year average of $2.7 million might be too aggressive, especially if the subcommittee recommends the grant funds as an offset to general fund appropriations. However, the grant has consistently remained above $2.2 million. If the subcommittee wishes to recommend including SCAP grant revenue in the agency's budget, it may wish to consider increasing the amount from the $1.5 million included in the budget amendment. The decisions for the subcommittee on page 49. A, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to not include revenue from the Federal State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, or SCAP grant, in the 25-27 biennium for the Director's Office budget account? Or B, Does the subcommittee wish to recommend including revenue from the federal SCAP grant in the 25-27 biennium for the Director's Office budget account? If the subcommittee wishes to include SCAP grant revenue in the Director's Office budget account in the 25-27 biennium, the subcommittee should determine, 1, if it wishes to recommend $1.5 million each year with expenditure authority in a special use category, as included in Budget Amendment A258273710, or 2, if it wishes to recommend a different amount of revenue each year, and 3, if it wishes to recommend the SCAP grant revenue as a general fund offset instead of including expenditure authority in a special use category.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate all the work that's been done on this. I think we're making some improvements in how we handle this budget account. Given the both the historical numbers that we've seen as well as the latest notice of funding, I'll try and keep this simple. So I move to recommend approval of item B and item 2, revising the amount of revenue each year to $2 million, and item 3 as read by staff.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 10 other closing items on page 49 of the closing packets and 5 more, bringing the total to 15 that are included on page 50. The decision box on page 51, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 10 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 11 be closed as recommended in Budget Amendment A251473710. Other closing item 12 be closed as recommended in Budget Amendment A251483710. Other closing item 13 be closed consistent with the subcommittee's actions in closing the Offender Store Fund budget account. Other closing item 14 be closed as recommended in Budget Amendments A254753710 and A256203710. And other closing item 15 be closed with the recommended technical adjustment to add funding for microwave Ethernet transport. Fiscal staff requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget account is Correctional Programs, which begins on page 53 of the closing packet. There is one major closing issue in this budget account, which is a new substance abuse counselor position. The governor recommends transfers of opioid settlement funds of $76,902 in fiscal '26 and $103,348 in fiscal year '27 from the Department of Health and Human Services Fund for a Resilient Nevada to support one new substance abuse counselor position. The recommended position would implement the medication-assisted treatment and medications for opioid use disorder program for all eligible offenders and supervise 4 existing licensed practical nurse positions and 2 program officer positions, which are funded with federal opioid strategic response grant funds. The agency indicates this position would ensure incoming offenders who are receiving medication for substance abuse disorders while in county jails would continue to receive medication while in NDOC custody and assist with post-release offender treatment plans. At the March 13th budget hearing, the agency testified that it was not currently addressing all offenders' needs for the MAT and MOUD treatments. Page 54 includes the decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for transfers of opioid settlement funds of $76,902 in fiscal year '26 and $103,348 in fiscal year '27 from the Department of Health and Human Services Fund for a Resilient Nevada budget account to support one new substance abuse counselor position and related expenses?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions or discussion for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
Thank you, Chair Watts. There is a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 8 other closing items for this budget account. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 5 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing items 6 be closed as recommended by the governor and not as amended by Budget Amendment A2558-43711. Other closing item 7 be closed as recommended in Budget A2558-43711. And other closing item 8 be closed consistent with the subcommittee's actions in closing the inmate welfare account, budget account. Fiscal staff requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? All right, the motion carries. Let the record show is unanimous of those who are present. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget account is Southern Desert Correctional Center, which begins on page 57 of the closing packet. There is one major closing issue in this budget account, which is a new correctional emergency response team. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $3.3 million in fiscal '26 and $5.2 million in fiscal '27 to add 49 positions to establish a new correctional emergency response team at the Southern Desert Correctional Center. The agency indicates this facility has not had its own CERT team and instead relied on personnel from High Desert State Prison to assist with incidents. And when incidents occur, areas of the facility are closed in order to free up staff to respond to the incident. The CERT would perform additional tasks besides responding to incidents, including monitoring offender correspondence, conducting random urinalysis, and performing targeted and random cell searches, amongst other duties. As noted, the governor's recommended budget includes 49 positions for the CERT teams, but the agency indicated the recommendation should include only 34 positions, calculated as 2 shifts with 10 positions per shift, plus a shift relief factor of 1.7. The agency has indicated it expects senior staff to fill the new positions, and the vacated existing positions would be filled with new hires. During the agency's budget hearing on February 26, 2025, the agency clarified that the governor's recommendation included 49 positions in order to have a CERT for each of the 3 shifts at the facility. However, no CERT would be required from midnight to 8 a.m. as offenders are locked in their cells overnight. On March 8, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A253723738, which reduces the positions in the CERT to 34, as discussed by the agency during the hearing, and the positions would still be phased in with start dates of October 25 and January 2026, as detailed in the table on page 59. With the change in total count of positions in this decision unit, the funding would be reduced to $2.3 million in fiscal year '26 and $3.6 million in fiscal year '27. The decision for the subcommittee on page 59 Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A2537233738 to add 34 positions to establish 2 new CERT shifts at Southern Desert Correctional Center, funded with general fund appropriations of $2.3 million in fiscal year '26 and $3.6 million in fiscal year '27?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There's a motion from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show is unanimous of those of us in attendance.
There are 2 other closing items in this budget account. Fiscal staff recommends other closing item 1 be closed as recommended by the governor, and other closing item 2 be closed as originally recommended by the governor in Decision Unit E930 and not as recommended in Budget Amendment A2537233738. Fiscal staff requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions from staff? I will entertain the motion.
Thank you. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There is a motion on the floor from Chair Watts, a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it's unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Continuing on page 61, the next budget account is Tonopah Conservation Camp. As discussed in the department overview, the governor recommends transfers of general fund appropriations of $703,382 in fiscal '26 and $726,399 in fiscal '27 to transfer 6 positions and associated costs from this budget account to the Director's Office, Northern Nevada Correctional Center, and High Desert State Prison. The 6 positions recommended for transfer from Tonopah Conservation Camp in the 25-27 biennium were eliminated by the 2023 legislature as part of the camp closure. However, the positions were reestablished in the governor's recommended base budget and are subsequently recommended to be transferred to other budget accounts. During the budget hearing on February 26, 2025, the agency explained the eliminated positions were not eliminated from the state's human resources data warehouse, even though they were not legislatively approved. On March 9th, 2025, Budget Amendment A2554-23754 was submitted by the Governor's Finance Office to remove all 6 positions from the base budget and decision units E902, E904, E905, and E911 to transfer the positions. Fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to remove uniform expenses that would still remain in the base budget after the budget amendments. The decision unit for the subcommittee on page 62. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A2554-23754 and inclusive of the technical adjustment to remove uniform expenses from the base budget of a decrease in general fund appropriations in the base budget of $703,383 in fiscal year '26 and $726,398 in fiscal '27, and a net increase of general fund appropriations in decision units E902, E904, E905, and E911 of $703,382 in fiscal year '26 and $726,399 in fiscal year '27 to effectively offset the original recommendation. Fiscal staff requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts. Is there a second? Second. Second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
There is one other closing item in this budget account, fiscal staff recommends the other closing item be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion, questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts, a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget account on page 65 is the Humboldt Conservation Camp, which is also a closed facility with a similar situation to the Tonopah Conservation Camp. The one major closing issue in this budget is the base budget funding for and transfer of eliminated positions. The governor recommends the transfer of general fund appropriations of $1.3 million each year of the 25-27 biennium to transfer 11 positions and associated costs from this budget account to other budget accounts in the department. The 11 positions recommended for transfer were eliminated by the 2023 legislature as part of the camp closure, therefore do not exist but were included in the governor's recommended budget and decision units to transfer the positions. On March 9th, 2025, Budget Amendment A25533333741 was submitted by the Governor's Finance Office to remove all 11 positions from the base budget and decision units E900, E901, and E902 to transfer the positions. The decision for the subcommittee on page 66. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A25533333741 and inclusive of the technical adjustment to remove uniform expenses from the base budget of a decrease in general fund appropriations in the base budget of $1.3 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium, and a net increase in general fund appropriations in decision units E901, E902, and E903 of $1.3 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium to effectively offset the original recommendation. Fiscal staff requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Is there any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There is a motion on the floor from Chair Watts. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second from Senator Nguyen. All those in favor of the, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget account begins on page 69, which is prison industry. There's one major closing issue in this budget account, which is the budget solvency. The governor recommends a one-time transfer of $250,000 from the offender store fund budget account in fiscal 26 and the elimination of 4 vacant positions in the prison industry budget account to improve the solvency of this budget account in the 25-27 biennium. Without decision units to increase the retained earnings through additional revenues or to decrease expense authority in this budget account, the budget would be insolvent by the end of the 25-27 biennium. The governor recommends a one-time $250,000 transfer from the offender store fund budget account in fiscal year 26, which was previously discussed in that budget account and recommended to be replaced with general fund appropriations. The revenues in this budget account, excluding retained earnings balanced forward each year, have not exceeded the expenses since fiscal year 2021, as detailed in the table on page 70, which would indicate the retained earnings, which function as a reserve in this budget account, have been used in order to fund the agency's operations. According to the agency, the need to use retained earnings to fund expenses is partially due to increased costs, including salaries, offender wages, materials, and shipping. Decision Unit E306, as noted and discussed in the other budget account, Assembly Bill 3 of the 31st special session required a reversion of $250,000 of retained earnings from this budget account to the general fund, and the agency indicates this reduction in retained earnings depleted the agency's cash flow needed to maintain operations, and the governor's recommended transfer from the offender store fund would replace the reverted funds. Decision Unit E305, to reduce costs, the governor recommends the elimination of 4 vacant positions in this budget account. During the budget hearing on March 13th, 2025, the agency indicated it performs quarterly reviews of costs to make products, and after custom orders have been filled, the agency reviews the actual costs to identify if the agency's process for quoting prices should be adjusted. And the agency considers the quality of its product and need to make a profit, along with the need to remain competitively priced when calculating prices. Subsequent to the budget hearing, the agency indicated it anticipates the FY25 ending balance in the prison industry budget account to be approximately $507,000, which is $410,916 less than the governor's recommended FY26 beginning balance of $918,277, which would indicate further expense reductions or revenue increases might be needed in the 25-27 biennium in order for this budget account to have sufficient funding to continue its operations. Inclusive of all decision units in the governor's recommended budget, this budget account would have retained earnings of $337,675 in fiscal 27. And if the beginning balance of fiscal 2026 is reduced by $410,916, the prison industry budget account would be insolvent by the end of fiscal 2027 by $73,241. Given the budget account is projected to be insolvent by the end of fiscal 27, the subcommittee may wish to issue a letter of intent to the NDOC to report to the Interim Finance Committee semi-annually on the steps it is taking to ensure the prison industry budget account remains solvent through the 25-27 biennium. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 72. Decision Unit E306, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a one-time transfer of $250,000 in fiscal 2026 from the Offender Store Fund budget account, which the subcommittee previously approved to change to general fund appropriations, enclosing the Offender Store Fund budget account? Decision Unit E305, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for the elimination of 4 vacant positions in this budget account, resulting in savings of $405,853 in fiscal 26 and $418,682 in fiscal 2027? And does the subcommittee wish to issue a letter of intent to the NDOC to report to the Interim Finance Committee semi-annually on the steps it is taking to ensure the prison industry budget account remains solvent through the 25-27 biennium?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions from staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick note, obviously, we are, the presentation that we got, we could feel the enthusiasm about some of the opportunities and some of this follow-up information. As we all know, we're continuing to see increasing economic uncertainty and see that is also affecting some of the prospects for growth within prison industry, at least within the short term. Very concerned about the solvency of this budget account in the long term, and a little bit uneasy with the potential of seeing this budget become insolvent. One thing that had come up before and that I think would be worth looking into is the potential of combining the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts. I know that there's some of those federal funds that come from BLM for the horse program that need to be managed separately, but that might at least provide some additional stability given where we're seeing kind of the current projections in both of those individual accounts. So that's just my kind of note and ask for you to look into. So the motion that I would make is to recommend approval of one-time general fund appropriations of $250,000 in fiscal year 2026, consistent with the subcommittee's recommendation in closing the Offender Store Fund budget account, and recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for the elimination of 4 vacant positions in this budget account, resulting in savings of $405,853 in fiscal year 2026 and $418,682 in fiscal year 2027, and issuing a letter of intent to the NDOC to report to the Interim Finance Committee semi-annually on the steps it's taking to ensure the prison industry budget account remains solvent through the 2025-27 biennium, including an evaluation of the potential efficiencies or savings that would result from combining the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts. Is there a second? Oh, there's a second from Senator Nguyen. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. The opposition? Let the record show it is unanimous. Thank you so much. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 4 other closing items for this budget account on page 72. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 4 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts, a second from Senator Nguyen. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget account is Prison Ranch, which begins on page 75. One major closing issue in this budget account, which is the budget solvency, the governor recommends a one-time transfer of $350,000 in fiscal year 26 from the Offender Store Fund budget account and expense reductions of $240,000 in fiscal year 26 and $235,000 in fiscal year 27 to address projected shortfalls in this budget account in the 25-27 biennium. Without decision units to increase the retained earnings through additional revenues or to decrease expense authority in this budget account, the budget would be insolvent in the 25-27 biennium. The retained earnings in this budget account have been declining since fiscal year 2020, which would indicate the agency has been utilizing retained earnings to fund the agency's operations as shown in the table on page 26. The agency indicates the reduction in retained earnings resulted in an increase in the cost of supplies because the agency no longer had sufficient earnings available to be able to make bulk purchases. In Decision Unit E306, the governor recommends the one-time transfer of $350,000 from the Offender Store Fund budget account, which was discussed and recommended to be changed to general fund appropriations, which would be a replacement for the funds that were reverted pursuant to AB 3 of the 31st special session. In Decision Unit E303, the Prison Ranch budget account previously included sales of processed milk, cream, and surplus raw milk. However, the agency paused the dairy operation in fiscal 2024 due to staffing issues, rising costs, obsolete equipment, and weather-related building damage. The governor recommends reductions in dairy-related feed and farming supplies expenses of $120,000 each year of the 25-27 biennium. In Decision Unit E304, the governor recommended base budget includes $1.5 million in each year for the wild horse program feed and farming supplies, and if the recommended reductions of $120,000 in fiscal year 26 and $115,000 in fiscal year 27 are approved, expenditure authority would be $1.4 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium. The revenue in the governor's recommended budget is primarily derived from the agency's contract with the BLM for the boarding of wild horses, and during the budget hearing on March 13th, 2025, the agency explained that the current revenue contract with BLM was negotiated in 2018 based on costs at the time. However, the revenue from the contract did not increase as a result of increased costs experienced by the agency. The agency is hopeful that with a new 5-year BLM contract will be approved within the next 6 months. The agency indicated it was working with the Dairy Farmers of America to determine the best option to replace the dairy's fluid milk production operation and was considering buying bulk powdered milk from a milk plant in Fallon to repackage into single servings of milk powder to supply to facilities. The agency testified that it tried to take advantage of doing bulk buys of items such as hay when they're cheapest, and that the agency tries to have multiple suppliers for products to encourage bidding and lower costs. Subsequent to the budget hearing, the agency indicated it anticipates the projected ending balance in the prison ranch budget account for fiscal '25 to be approximately $443,295, which is $359,573 higher than the governor's recommended fiscal year 2026 beginning balance of $83,722. The decision for the subcommittees on page 78. For decision unit E306, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a one-time transfer of $350,000 in fiscal year 2026, which the subcommittee previously approved to be recommended to change to a one-time general fund appropriation of $350,000? Decision unit E303, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of dairy-related feed and farming supply expense reductions of $120,000 each year of the 25-27 biennium as recommended by the governor? And decision unit E304, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of wild horse program feed and farming supply expense reductions of $120,000 in fiscal year 26 and $115,000 in fiscal year 27 as recommended by the governor?
Thank you so much, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Thank you. I move to recommend approval of this item as stated by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries, and let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
There are three other closing items for this budget account on page 78. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 3 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to recommend approval of this item as read by staff.
There's a motion on the floor from Chair Watts and a second from Senator Nguyen. Discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, I will now begin presenting the budgets which the subcommittee has not previously reviewed for the Department of Corrections and for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations. When I've presented the last budget in this group, I will pause for questions before reading staff's recommendations for all of the budgets for which staff is responsible for developing the recommendations. The first budget account, which begins on page 81, is Southern Nevada Correctional Center. There are no major closing issues and one other closing item for this budget. Northern Nevada Correctional Center on page 83. There are no major closing issues and 10 other closing items. Budget account 3718 Nevada State Prison on page 87. There are no major closing issues and no other closing items. Ely State Prison on page 89. There are no major closing issues and 6 other closing items. Lovelock Correctional Center, budget account 3759. There are no major closing issues and 6 other closing items. Budget account 3761, Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center. There are no major closing issues and 1 other closing item. High Desert State Prison. There are no major closing issues and 7 other closing items. On page 101 of the closing packet is Northern Nevada Transitional Housing, which has no major closing issues and no other closing items. Casa Grande Transitional Housing has no major closing issues and 1 other closing item. On page 105, Stewart Conservation Camp, which has no major closing issues and no other closing items. Pioche Conservation Camp on page 107 has no major closing issues and 3 other closing items. Three Lakes Valley Conservation Camp on page 109 has no major closing issues and 4 other closing items. Ely Conservation Camp on page 111 has no major closing issues and 1 other closing item. Jean Conservation Camp on page 113 has no major closing issues and 1 other closing item. Silver Springs Conservation Camp on page 115, no major closing issues and 1 other closing item. Carlin Conservation Camp on page 117, no major or other closing items.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion or questions before we get to the decision box? Okay, seeing none, please proceed.
Fiscal staff recommends that the following budget accounts be closed as recommended by the governor with the technical adjustments and budget amendments noted and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. 101-3715, NDOC Southern Nevada Correctional Center. 101-3717, NDOC Northern Nevada Correctional Center, inclusive of budget amendment A254913717 to eliminate the transfer of previously eliminated positions from the Humboldt and Tonopah Conservation Camp budget accounts, and budget amendment A256733717 to remove 4 extra positions from the base budget. 101-3718 NDOC Nevada State Prison, 101-3751 NDOC Ely State Prison, inclusive of approving the updated offender population projections and not approving budget amendment A255753751 for the transfer of offender-driven costs from High Desert State Prison that are not necessary, and approving budget amendment A258173751 with the noted technical adjustment to correct the position count. 101-3759 NDOC Lovelock Correctional Center, inclusive of budget amendment A255353759 to eliminate the transfer of previously eliminated positions from the Humboldt Conservation Camp budget account. 101-3761 NDOC Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center. 101-3762 NDOC High Desert State Prison, inclusive of the portion of budget amendment A256403762 to remove 1 extra position from the base budget and not approve the transfer of offender-driven costs to this budget account in Decision Unit E904, and the transfer of offender-driven costs from this budget account to the Ely State Prison budget account as included in budget amendment A256403762, and approve budget amendment A254773762 to eliminate the transfer of a previously eliminated position from Tonopah Conservation Camp. Budget account 101-3724, NDOC Northern Nevada Transitional Housing. 101-3760, Casa Grande Transitional Housing. 101-3722, Stewart Conservation Camp. 101-3723, Pioche Conservation Camp, inclusive of the noted technical adjustment to remove overtime expenses in the base budget. 3725, Three Lakes Valley Conservation Camp. 3747, Ely Conservation Camp. 3748, Jean Conservation Camp. 3749, Silver Springs Conservation Camp, and 3752, Carlin Conservation Camp.
All right, that was a mouthful, Ms. Morris. Thank you so much. Any questions before we look for a motion? Okay, I'll entertain the motion at this time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Morris, for doing all the reading. I move to recommend approval as read by staff.
There is a motion on the floor from Chair Watts, a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Is there opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show that it is unanimous. Ms. Morris, thank you so much for all of that work in getting through all of these budgets. Now, this time, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the action on the Nevada Department of Corrections inmate welfare account That's decision units E901, E902, and E903. This is 03. This is on page 34 of our closing packet. Okay, there is a motion on the floor to reconsider those decision units. Is there a sec? Oh, there is a second. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Titus?
Thank you. I remain in opposition, and
Just reconsider your motion.
I support my colleague's motion to reconsider the vote, but will remain in opposition.
Appreciate that, Senator Titus. And for the record, this is just a vote for the Senate side, because this decision unit passed on the Assembly side. Okay, this is just the motion to reconsider, so we'll take a vote on that. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. This is just a Senate vote, because it already passed on the Assembly side, Assembly Member Anderson. Okay, that's all in favor, say aye. Any opposition to the reconsideration? Thank you so much, Senator Titus. The reconsideration does pass. Okay, so now I would like to make a motion, right, to, let me get back to my motion. I got it marked. I make a motion that we recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer 16 positions from the inmate welfare account budget, inmate welfare account budget account to the correctional programs budget account, and change the funding source of the positions to general fund appropriations of $1.7 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, and also to give fiscal staff the authority to make any transfers and adjustments as necessary. There is a motion on the floor to approve this decision. Is there discussion on the motion, which we had? So noted, Senator Titus. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. 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 Opposition? Nay. Thank you so much. Let the record show that Senator Titus is in opposition, Senator Nguyen and Senator Taylor is in favor. So that motion does carry. Okay, so we are finished with all of our budgets. Thank you so much for being all of our budget accounts. Thank you so much for being here. We are now down to the last item on our agenda. That item is public comment. If you are here in Carson City and would like to make public comment, please come forward, or in Las Vegas if you'd like to make public comment, come forward. Okay, seeing none, AVH, we'll see is there anyone on the line for public comment?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working, but there are no callers to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you so much. That concludes our meeting of the subcommittee this morning. We are adjourned. Thank you for your work, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.